In a dusty corner of Williamson's Antique Emporium in Salem, Massachusetts, photography historian Dr. Amanda Foster made a discovery that would challenge everything she thought she knew about Victorian mourning practices. Among a collection of estate sale photographs, she found an image that immediately held her attention. The albumen print, mounted on thick cardboard in the style of 1890s studio work, showed two young women in elaborate Victorian dresses posed in a well-furnished parlor. The photographer's embossed mark read Hartwell and Sunshine Photography, Boston, Massachusetts, 1890. On the reverse, written in faded ink, were the words, "My dearest daughters, Margaret and Elizabeth, forever in my heart, mother." At first the picture seemed a typical Victorian sister portrait. Both women wore fashionable bustle gowns, Margaret in deep burgundy velvet with jet beading, Elizabeth in navy blue silk with intricate lace. Their hair was arranged in the elaborate Gibson girl style popular at the time, and both showed calm, gentle smiles. Margaret, the older sister at about 22, sat in an ornate carved chair with her hands folded naturally in her lap. Her posture was relaxed, and her eyes looked bright and engaged with the camera. Elizabeth, about 19, stood beside her with one hand resting on Margaret's shoulder. Yet something about Elizabeth troubled Foster's experienced eye. Her body seemed unusually rigid, her left arm hung in an unnatural way, and her open eyes held a glassy quality that did not match the lively look expected in professional portraits of the era. Dr. Foster had specialized in Victorian photography for more than 15 years, with particular knowledge of mourning and memorial pictures. She recognized subtle signs that this might be a post-mortem photograph, the Victorian custom of photographing deceased family members as a final keepsake. The lighting on Elizabeth's face appeared different from Margaret's, as if extra powder or cosmetics had been used to create a healthier appearance. Elizabeth's necklace was arranged with unusual care, possibly to hide signs of illness or physical decline. The photographer had also used a shallow depth of field that kept both subjects sharp while blurring the background, a technique sometimes employed to hide the mechanical supports needed to hold a body in position. Foster's research began with the studio itself. Hartwell and Sunshine Photography was a respected Boston firm that had operated during the peak of Victorian memorial photography. Founded by Samuel Hartwell in 1875 and later joined by his son Thomas, the studio was known for sensitive and skillful post-mortem work. The appointment ledger for October 1890 contained a clear entry: Whitman Family Memorial Portrait, Miss Elizabeth and Miss Margaret, special arrangements, extended session required, father's request for natural appearance. Thomas Hartwell's personal journal gave further details. Miss Elizabeth had died 3 days earlier from consumption, tuberculosis. Her father, Dr. Jonathan Whitman, specifically asked that the picture look as natural as possible, showing both daughters as they had been in life. Hartwell's notes described the extraordinary care he took. He restored Elizabeth's complexion with theatrical cosmetics and careful lighting to replace the color that illness had taken away. Her eyes were held open with glass supports, and her hair was arranged to match recent photographs provided by their family. The session lasted more than 3 hours, far longer than a normal portrait sitting. Elizabeth's body needed constant adjustment and support, while Margaret required frequent breaks to regain her composure. Hartwell later wrote of his own doubts. While the family's grief was understandable, he questioned whether creating such a convincing illusion of life truly helped their healing. He noted that Margaret appeared deeply distressed throughout the sitting, struggling to pose naturally beside her sister while keeping the calm expression needed for a successful photograph. Dr. Jonathan Whitman had been one of Boston's most respected physicians in the 1880s and 1890s, specializing in lung diseases at a time when tuberculosis killed thousands every year. The family lived in a grand house on Beacon Hill. Whitman's wife Sarah had died in 1885 from childbirth complications, leaving him to raise Margaret and Elizabeth alone. Contemporary newspapers described him as a devoted father who gave his daughters the best education and cultural opportunities. Margaret showed talent in music and literature. Elizabeth had artistic gifts that her father encouraged with private lessons. Yet the family's comfort was overshadowed by the disease that would claim Elizabeth's life. Whitman's own medical journals, preserved in the Boston Medical Library, recorded his growing alarm as Elizabeth's condition worsened through 1890, despite every treatment available: rest cures, special diets, stays at mountain sanitariums, and medicines imported from Europe. Elizabeth died on the 12th of October, 1890. Margaret's letters and diary show that she had been her sister's main caregiver in the final months, reading to her, helping with correspondence, and trying to keep an optimistic atmosphere. After the death, Dr. Whitman insisted on the memorial portrait as part of the funeral preparations. Margaret's diary entries from those days reveal her mixed feelings. She wrote that her father believed the picture would preserve their sisterly bond, yet she felt disturbed by the idea of posing with Elizabeth's body. She described watching her father and the photographer's assistant arrange Elizabeth's features and apply makeup, calling the process a violation of her sister's peaceful rest, even while understanding her father's need to remember her as she had been in life. During the long photography session, Margaret struggled to maintain composure. She wrote that the effort of smiling naturally while Elizabeth lay still beside her was exhausting beyond description. She found herself speaking to her sister throughout the sitting, hoping for a response she knew would never come. Afterwards, she could not sleep for days, haunted by dreams in which Elizabeth appeared alive in the photograph yet remained silent and unresponsive. The boundary between life and death felt dangerously blurred. She also worried about her father's attachment to the finished image, fearing that such a realistic picture prevented them from accepting the finality of death and beginning to heal. Thomas Hartwell himself grew uneasy about the work. In private letters, he expressed pride in the technical excellence of the portrait, but questioned whether it served the family's long-term emotional welfare. He observed that Margaret showed signs of severe distress, and that Dr. Whitman, despite his medical training, seemed unable to recognize his daughter's suffering. Hartwell even consulted the psychologist William James, who warned that images which too convincingly simulated life might prevent bereaved families from progressing through the necessary stages of grief. By the following year, Hartwell had begun refusing commissions that required extreme measures to create lifelike appearances, choosing instead to emphasize artistic beauty and honest acknowledgement of death. Later technical examination of the photograph, carried out with the help of the Smithsonian's Photography Conservation Laboratory, confirmed the sophisticated methods Hartwell had used. High-resolution scans and spectral analysis showed differences in the chemical processing between the two subjects. Infrared photography revealed the glass supports that had held Elizabeth's eyes open. There was evidence of fine retouching around her eyes and of composite techniques that combined the post-mortem body with elements from earlier living portraits. Magnification of Margaret's face showed subtle signs of strain and forced emotional control consistent with the long, traumatic session she had endured. The long-term effects on the family were serious. Margaret's diary entries from 1891 and 1892 describe her father's habit of spending hours studying the photograph and speaking to Elizabeth's image. She herself continued to suffer nightmares and anxiety linked to the sitting. By 1893, she secured a teaching post at a girls' academy in Vermont and left the Beacon Hill house, finding relief in living away from the image that had made natural grieving impossible. Dr. Whitman's professional life declined after her departure. Colleagues noted his increasing preoccupation with death-related cases and his inappropriate references to his deceased daughter during consultations. Patients grew uncomfortable, and his practice suffered. Margaret later reflected, in writings found among her papers after her death in 1954, that the beautiful but terrible photograph had robbed the family of the right to grieve naturally. Elizabeth deserved to rest in peace, and the survivors deserved to remember her with love, rather than the artificial happiness the camera had captured. The Whitman portrait is now held by the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of American History. It is displayed with research that explains both the technical mastery that made Elizabeth appear so lifelike and the emotional cost paid by the living sister and father. The picture stands as a historically important example of Victorian post-mortem photography, at its most skillful, and also as a cautionary reminder that even the most carefully crafted memorial image can hinder healing when it denies the reality of death instead of helping the living move forward.